Hello there, MFT. It's Sandy Allnock with this month's Create in Color, the first of 2021, which means you survived 2020. Congratulations. And I'm going to be coloring the Hug It Out stamp set, at least one of the images from it. Lots of little pairings of animals, but this stamp is the bigger one that has all the animals in it. And I am so happy I don't have to mask anything. If you don't like masking either, this is the stamp set for you. And I'm using my Prismacolor pencils in order to color it, and I've stamped it using second generation stamping. And the way that works, you take a light gray or a medium gray ink and get it all set up in your MISTI to stamp, put in a scratch piece of paper, stamp it once, and then without re-inking, stamp it again, and you'll get a light impression. You can do that with other colors too. You know, you could do an image like this with a light green ink probably and get away with it fine. You just have to cover all that ink with your colored pencil, which is real easy to do. The bear in the middle can be an issue for a stamp like this because the bear is just one big blob of color, whereas all the other little animals have more definition to them. I chose to make it a black bear, and black bears have brown noses and brown tummies. And maybe that's my reason for justifying that I'm making a black bear, because I love black bears. I lived in Montana for some time, used to see lots of black bears, but I love the fact that they have some difference in their color, because a giant blob of whatever single color you make a bear can end up looking like a giant blob of color. So not only do I get to separate out the snout and the tummy with a different color, now I'm also breaking up his body into visually different shapes. So looking at coloring each one of them in its own shape helps me to decide where shading should be. So I'm kind of jumping around different areas on the bear to create, you know, the long oblong of the arm, and then the roundness of the bottom of his belly, and that sort of thing. Putting in my darkest first with a darker black color, and then I'll go to a medium gray and then a lighter gray. And you could build up different areas of light and dark within a giant shape like this, because as I said, it can be kind of challenging, especially if you're doing no line coloring, because now you don't even have stamp lines to break up the different shapes. So the coloring can really help in doing that kind of a thing. Also, this whole stamp is made up of animals that are in mostly natural colors. And natural colors for animals are blacks and browns and grays and that sort of thing. You can, of course, make them in, make a purple bear and an orange raccoon, and like whatever colors you want is perfectly fine. But if you're going for natural colors, you also have to figure out how to differentiate between one animal and another when they're all in one scene together. So in my picture, I'm making sure that my bear is going to be the darkest one. But here I'm putting in some light grays to kind of reaffirm the highlights, but I have to go back in with some darker color over top of it. If I don't press really, really, really hard, I can go over this with a gajillion layers and keep improving on it and keep creating more of that depth and roundness. So if you press too hard all at once, you could cause yourself problems in trying to do any tweaks to it further on down in your coloring. So keep the first layers light so that you don't have to deal with so much waxy buildup. And whatever brand it is you use, whether they're wax pencils or non-wax pencils, colored pencil just does that. It's just the way that it lays down color. So using a little lighter of a touch tends to work a little bit better. So I'm finally happy with my bear. Put the most work into him because he's the biggest guy in the picture. And then started working on some of the other images. And I'm going to do the little fox. I love that the fox is just hanging on to the back of the bear. It just feels like such a huggy image. I just love this. And the sentiment that, well, all the sentiments in the set are great, but this sentiment in particular, air hugs till we can bear hug, is particularly awesome. Because right now, all we can do is air hugs. We want this pandemic to end so we can go back to bear hugs again. And I can't wait until that day comes when we can finally go back to quote unquote normal. But the sentiment up there, by the way, is all in one line. I ended up breaking it up so that it would be a little tighter on my card and not be quite as wide. So I just did that not by cutting the stamp physically apart, which you could do, but I centered the air hugs till we can first and masked off the bear hug and then moved the whole stamp so that I could stamp the bear hug right underneath in the center. Well, I'm going to say in the center. It's mostly in the center. I'm terrible at measuring, so don't hold me to it. That's in the center. So next up is the little bunny. And I'm trying to use some of the same colors across the different animals in this. Because like I said, they're natural colored animals. So I don't want to kind of jump into all kinds of crazy colors. I want them to relate to each other. So using the same kinds of colors in each of the animals, using just a little bit of different color to add variety, is going to help in unifying the whole image. So I'm using that same tummy color that I used on the bear, and I'm just going to add some shadows to it that I didn't add to the bear, so it'll feel like a different colored bunny than the bear's stomach. So it relates to it, but not in a way that makes it feel like it's the same thing. And again, if you end up with a color that gets too dark, just go over it again with another layer of the lighter color, and you can just start to get softer blending going on between the colors when you do that. The next one is the raccoon. And you may want to make sure you Google raccoons when you color raccoons, because I can't tell you how many times that I have to do it because my natural way to color them is not the way that raccoons actually look. They have a gray head, but they have a white line in between their mask and their gray head. So keep an eye on that when you're coloring raccoons, because that can be something that slips you up. Not that most of the rest of the world will even notice. But with me having a background in wildlife illustration, it's really important to me to try to get them kind of right. So here I'm putting on this black mask, leaving that little white line. And the little details like that white line are something that when you're coloring in no-line coloring really helps to define things. When you can leave some sharp details, some really strong details. One of the other details that you might notice jumps out immediately is the nose on the fox, because the black nose is very black and the white around it is very white. And anywhere where you have a dark next to a light, wherever your lightest and your darkest are, that's where attention it goes to immediately and really draws the eye. So that will really be helpful. The outside edges that are white on things can sometimes be a challenge in no-line coloring, so put a little tiny bit of a light gray in there, and you can help to define some of those areas, even if the stamp is showing a little bit. Sometimes just adding a little shadow will soften that. And then the last little guy is the squirrel. And for him, I wanted him to feel like he was in a different color combination than the others, but I still wanted to use the same colors. So I started out by coloring him first in a gray. And then remembering that the tail on the squirrel, the top of it has gray on it, but the bottom side of it is where all the white fur is. And I added in some shadows and that sort of thing. And the bear also has this little paw around the squirrel, so there's a little dark black in there. And the gray squirrel and the gray raccoon just felt like they were getting too blendy to each other. They started looking like they were the same color. So I took the shadow color from my fox and added it as a little bit of a layer over top of the gray in the squirrel, and that suddenly pulled him into a different coloration while still using the same colors that were available to me in the set that I used on this particular card. So it kept everything relating to each other at the same time. For the owl, I just picked some colors that were in other animals in the picture so that he would have some relation to everything else that's here. Even though each animal has its own distinct coloration, all of those colors now relate to each other. All I had to do was add a little shadow around the bottom and then go over it with some white in order to soften the edges of it. And it's all done. I mean, I think this came out really simple, but very sweet. And with that sentiment, it's super impactful because it says exactly what I wanted to say. I can't wait for a bear hug. I cannot wait until we can do that again. How about you? Well, I also have some excitement for Facebook. So as we've been doing for the last couple of months, I do a Facebook Live with some coloring that you can join in on. So go to the blog post, you can download the image for this, bring your colored pencils, and we'll do some coloring together, and I'll teach you a little something, and I will see you there, I hope. You can always catch the replay later. The link is in the blog post to the Facebook Live. I will see you again very soon. Bye-bye.